Hello, and welcome to this special presentation brought to you by Carolina Performing Arts. My name is Christopher Massenberg. I am the Rothwell Mellon Program Director for the Creative Futures Artist Residency at Carolina Performing Arts. Creative Futures is an initiative funded by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. It creates partnerships aimed at empowering communities to express creativity and discuss pressing issues, enriching university teaching and learning, and pioneering a new model for the commissioning of new artistic works. The initiative features 4 artists in residence that lead co-creative teams that consist of faculty and community collaborators that engage collectively in multi-year projects. Today, we will join one of those artists, composer-performer Shara, and her collaborators for a revealing discussion about Body Vessel, the work she's developing as part of her residency. She'll be joined by Helga Davis, also a Creative Futures Fellow and project collaborator, artist Annica Cuppetelli, director Mark DeChiazza, and faculty collaborator Dr. Tanya Shields of UNC Chapel Hill's Department of Women's and Gender Studies. We appreciate you being in attendance and we hope that you enjoy the event. On behalf of Carolina Performing Arts, we thank you for your support.
Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Body Vessel creative team and also Professor Shields, I'd like to ask that we hold a moment of silence before we start our discussion tonight. We'd like to honor and mourn George Floyd and the countless others who've been murdered in the enforcement of an unjust system. The silence that we are going to hold also opens a space for all the voices that have been bravely raising every night, impatiently demanding that this has to end. So let's take 30 seconds and be silent together. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Tanya Shields, as I think it says on the screen. But as we move from this moment of silence, we move to a moment of dialogue. And we hope that you will join us in this dialogue. Please send your questions to both Facebook and YouTube, and we will take those at the end. I think, as Mark has said, that the silence that we hold was a space to also make room for voices. And I think that's part of what this project is doing. So what I'm going to do, I'm one of the co-facilitators for tonight's conversation, and we're really hoping that it will be a conversation, not just amongst the faces that you see on the screen, but also with you as well. And what I'm going to do is to ask all the participants if they would introduce themselves, but in that introduction, if they would also tell us what Body Vessel is. Shara, do you want to start?
My name is Shara Nova, and I am a composer and a singer and a mother. And it's very difficult to say what Body Vessel is right now because we are in the middle of a process of creating it. But what we do know is that it is an environment that is created by a sculpture that Annica Cuppetelli created and first inspired me the second I saw the drawing of this sculptural idea. I really wanted to make something with it. So that was the beginning of it.
Thank you.
I think it's interesting that you talk about an environment for the piece, Shara. I also think of it as an invitation. It is an invitation and an invocation, an invitation for us to examine our ties to one another, and an invocation of our intention to bring ourselves as performers, as composers, as artists, as women, as all of the things that we are, to a conversation that is also about our friendship. And so that too is a very exciting prospect to me for this work.
Annica?
Yeah, so I'm an artist and designer, and created the sculpture that Helga and Shara are actually performing in. To me, what maybe the initial idea of what this was to be, where it's a sculpture that needs two people to embody it for it to come alive, is well, it is still growing. It is still becoming something, and it's forever going to be transforming. And that's where I kind of see this piece kind of going right now.
Thank you. Mark?
I'm a director, and I see Body Vessel as it's a very different piece than I've ever worked on, in that, in one sense, it's extremely particular, almost documentary, because it really looks at a real friendship, which is Shara and Helga's longstanding friendship, the relationship they've had. And through this sculpture that Annica made, they are connected and held together. And so all the challenges and all the joys and all of the differences and all of the alignments of a friendship are enforced in a way by this sculpture that holds them, binds them together. Because of that, it's also a very universal piece, even though it's so particularly about them. But then we're really talking about bigger things, I think, about friendship, about bonds, and how we are unified and how we are different, and we are also all tied together.
Right. I think that is, again, so critical for our moment. And since you've all talked about how the piece is based on the friendship between Helga and Shara, would you also talk about, Helga and Shara, why you decided to use your friendship to make art in this particular way? And then Annica and Mark, if you can talk about what it means for you to sort of come in and be asked to collaborate on a friendship that's already established, that would be terrific. So Helga, we'll start with you this time.
I am always, 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 always interested in and looking for ways to engage a kind of civic responsibility I feel I have to not only make art, but to be able to talk about life, to talk about relationship, to talk about the world with the things that I do. I think so often it's easy as citizens to point to issues, matters, concerns that are happening somewhere over there. Where is over there? There are people over there, as there are people right where our feet are, right where we're standing. And so it always occurs to me first to see what the work is right where my feet are, before I think about anywhere else, any other group of people, what's happening right where I'm standing. And what has been beautiful about my relationship with Shara is that I feel that we met each other, and that in every way that is not tangible, that is beyond words, we were bound to one another. And then we got to make music together. And so it seemed a natural progression that in the ways that we as artists are discovering the world, that we are in the world, that we begin right where we are, which is with each other. Because many of the things that we care about that are happening in the world are happening with us also. Whether or not we have language for it, whether or not we have exact experiences around it, they are happening between us as well. And I can't think of a more important, vital, safe space in which to explore the things that we care about than inside my relationship with Shara. And I think it's important that we know it, and that people who experience the work know that it's possible in all the ways that we are the same and in all the ways that we are different, that true love, friendship, connection, and bonds can exist between people who perhaps superficially seem very different.
Thank you. Shara?
When we were talking in years past about events that were happening in the world, the way that we saw these events were, we had really different responses. And so when we talked about what do we want to make, it's like, how might we make this process visible to other people? What would that look like? And because we wanted to be in conversation with local communities, to be able to hear from young people, like, for example, we're working with Northern High School. And so to be in conversation with these young people and then say, where are you at? How do you identify yourself? What makes you proud to be a Southerner? What's hard about being named a Southerner or feeling a Southern identity? Let's talk about it. And so rather than using a character that was outside of ourselves, we could have an ongoing, changing, evolving piece, and that was really very, very important to us.
Thank you. Mark?
Well, I was going to say, because this piece connects to history in so many ways, that there's a personal history of this friendship. There's the history, the deeper history that it roots into through both of the two subjects, and then also just the history of the piece really comes from Shara's encounter initially with Annica's work. So I thought we might look at Annica's studio visit video and just to get a better idea of sort of where the history that work roots into.
Perfect.
My name is Annica Cuppetelli, and I'm an artist who has been studying the medium of fiber, textiles, and fashion, and how they intersect. A huge interest for me is how the garment interacts with the female body, and how historically it has defined women's roles in society. I make sculptures, installations, and garments, which all these questions kind of hopefully bring up within the work. With my sculptures, I use a lot of boning, which is a material that gives a corset structure or a garment. It also restricts and redefines the shape of the body. This collaboration for me started off really naturally. There was a visit to my studio that Shara Nova did and wanted to just kind of talk, and she had an interest in my sculptures. And as we were talking and I was showing her sculptures, I was also showing her some images and some ideas that I've had for performative dresses / sculptures. And that's really where this piece started. As we started kind of hashing it out and kind of talking about ideas, my role more as designer and creative on that end, we were thinking about names. And I still remember the moment of sitting in my studio and looking around at the sculptures, and I was like, well, these are called body vessel. And that's where the name came from. Some other ideas that I had for this dress piece was the idea of movement and constriction, and also the tension between two bodies. Some things that I was questioning about it and still am, as I'm actually seeing it develop through the last 2 years, is how do two people interact when you're contained in one piece, or let's just say one vessel? What does it mean when somebody is having to hold one person up, but you still need to be able to function together at the same time? The corset is a garment that has been in fashion for more than 400 years. It is a garment that constricts and physically reforms the body. It's been a point for me of research for many years, and it's something that I've been thinking a lot about within constructing the bodice for Body Vessel, the performance piece. When I've been working on the corset, let's just say, or what I'm trying to reference within Body Vessel, the performance piece, I'm thinking about the constriction and the tightness, but I'm also thinking about the relationship between two females and what that means and the way that they need to work within the same garment, even though they're separate. One of the things that part of my research is the parachute. The parachute is, of course, something that stops an object in motion as it's falling down from the air. And I've always been really interested, a little fascinated with this idea. And that is part of the bottom of the dress, where it's all made out of parachute fabric. So we've done a lot of studies, a lot of experiments to see how this material could perform along within the context of this piece. It's interesting to me that it's finally coming to life, let's just say, but also under these circumstances. I feel like every time I get together and I work with the other collaborators, this piece becomes more and more present, and especially within our times now of what does movement, constriction, and relationships really mean.
Wonderful. I think from your last set of responses, a couple things jumped out to me in your responses. One was place, how place figures in what you're doing. Like Helga, you talked about a civic place, being a citizen, belonging to a place, what that means. Mark, I think you mentioned history. Shara, you mentioned the idea of a Southern identity, which again locks us into a place, and how space defines a place, how history defines a place. And Annica, you're talking about how the garment defines a place. And I wanted to know if you could talk a little bit. One of the things that you said in the video that struck me is that as you become part of the process and you see the garment in real time being worn by Helga and Shara, you have a different relationship to it. So can you talk a little bit about how the garment itself and even your relationship to the garment is evolving when you see it in the place of the stage or the place of performance?
Yeah, it's, as a sculptor, I have to say that this is the first time that I've ever seen a piece come alive so much. And it was an idea that didn't exist before Helga and Shara came together and were in it, actually. So I think that's where I'm kind of coming from, of saying that it's these two together are bringing it to life and giving it a place in time. And historically, fashion has defined time through silhouettes, and it tells us history. And I think, I know what's interesting about this piece is that it's the past, it's the present, and the future. And it's just something that's really evolving and growing every time this group gets together and sees it. It's also something that, when you were asking before about the friendship of this being based on their friendship, which you see when it's in there, but it's also something that we can all really relate to, because there's aspects that we all have with other friendships. So I think that's what's also really powerful in what's happening too, is that it's just not a personal narrative. This is a larger picture that's happening within this piece.
Right. And that leads me to ask, what does it mean to work in the sculpture? Because I think, what is your relationship to the sculpture? Because I think when I've heard you talk about this before in other conversations, it's like the sculpture is its own entity. It is its own being. So how do you work with a being that doesn't necessarily speak the language that you speak? How do you find a language, a way of communicating with it, and then communicating with each other? And Shara, I'll start with you this time.
I wonder how Peter Pan would feel in those, devices that lift people up and help you fly around. This mechanism is very different because, you're in a tango, you're dancing with the other person in the piece, and what you do is never without consequence. And honestly, like the physical sensation of having a loss of control over your own body was shocking to me. And at the same time, it can be really liberating. Like, I've got you. I'm not going to let you fall. So it's a kinesthetic experience or a somatic experience, not an intellectual one in that way, because it is about the body.
I think that's exactly what I was going to, not exactly, but part of what I wanted to say was that it actually does speak a language we all speak, which is the experience of the body. We speak that first. We feel something in the body, we cry, we smile, we feel fear, right? So it does actually speak our first language, which is the experience through the body. Mm-hmm. And I think because it is so primal and so direct that we are often caught off guard because we are not actually always controlling what's happening. We are responding to, and I'll use Shara's word again, a kinesthetic impulse that is pre-language, that is and so, I may lift my arm, or Shara may turn around, and that pulls on a particular part of the garment, and then I just start to cry. Nothing happened. No one said anything. She made a very simple movement. I made a very simple gesture. And that is the language that we're having to learn.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thanks.
And not control. And that's where Mark comes in, that it is not a language that is to be confined. I mean, the garment, it's very funny, this juxtaposition of a garment that contains us, but that we are not in the practice of trying to contain what emerges, the language, the emotions that come out of that. What we want is to guide ourselves and our participants safely through the experience that we are also having in that moment or in a particular moment. Right, Mark?
Yes, exactly. there's a very clear metaphor that's physical and also visual in the two bodies in this sculpture, that it is impossible to do something without having an effect, not just on the other, but on everything, because one of them will move somewhere and the whole image changes, the whole meaning of the image. And there's a sense that the sculpture holds them to this. I like to say it kind of stretches the present moment and expands it so that you can't escape it. And sometimes, like Helga was describing, it's uncomfortable, or sometimes, it might just be very still. But it leaves a record of itself when there's a lot of that parachute fabric that connects the two of them. So sometimes these cause and effect things that happen between them can happen at a great distance. So even though they're very far away and maybe not looking at each other, they still affect each other. So that's a very powerful thing. So in terms of coming back to your question of place, there's almost a mythic space that this dress sculpture garment seems to occupy, where it changes time, it becomes its own place, and it makes certain demands, and everyone, the two have to operate within that system. So learning that from the outside is very interesting because it's such a large and strange system that I think when you are one part of it, as I had the misfortune of being once as Helga's stand-in, and I should say the sculpture had the misfortune of having me in it. But I learned that it was vastly different, the experience of being a part of it and looking at it. So it's something that we're all learning so much about. And it's great when Annica is there in the studio with us, just having her sort of, again, history and the knowledge of where this comes from and what it's about, and informing choices about movement and shapes and things like that. It's been exciting to collaborate that way.
Right, and I know we have some videos with other collaborators, or as Helga would say, interlocutors. So I do want to go to those videos shortly, but again, I want to sort of echo, I think, what I heard from the responses that you all gave, and some of the things that I came away with is being in the sculpture is never without consequence. And I'm highlighting these because I think it also speaks to our political, social, civic, personal moment. So never without consequences. It is primal. There's something primal happening here. We don't always have control. And there is an effect on the other, not only on the other, but on everything. And how sort of being in the garment, being in the space expands the moment. And I just feel like all of those things that you all said so speaks to our current reality, whether we want to talk about COVID, whether we want to talk about police brutality, whether we want to talk about, histories of injustice, like we have to reckon, I think, with all of these things. But in part of the reckoning, and I think what I find valuable about the project is we have to be honest with each other. Sometimes we do have to give up that control. But I think both Helga and Shara said in different ways, we support each other. I've got you, or I feel safe doing this with you. And I think that level of honesty or trust is what we need in all our collaborations. And so with that, perhaps we can look at one of the videos from the collaborators.
Yeah. Why don't we look at Zac? Shara, do you want to introduce Zac's role in the...
Zac is a Detroiter, and I live in Detroit, and I was really excited to work with him because of his very wide skill set. And so you will see some of that now.
My name is Zac Bru. I'm coming to you from Detroit, where I work as a multi-instrumentalist and concert producer under the collective name Detroit Bureau of Sound. I usually teach a lot and perform here in the city with my Cactus and modular synthesizer you see behind me. But from time to time, I get to work on projects like this one, where I can bring my whole oddball collection of skills to the table. I'm acting as a bit of a Swiss Army knife here. I'm a trained percussionist and pianist. I am an improviser and composer. I do electronic sound design, and like I said, do a lot of performing with a modular synthesizer. You can imagine how rare it might be to be called upon in all these different ways at once, and that's what makes this project such a treat for me to be a part of. I am amazed just by the thought of Shara and Helga on stage together. In our UNC workshop back in February, we did a sound and movement improvisation with Helga and Shara linked by the garment and moving around the space while I was accompanying them on low drum sounds. And in that moment, we all realized just how powerful this piece is really going to become. My role in this is a supportive one. I'm helping gather and create sounds that Shara and Helga will use to compose. Once we had returned to Detroit from UNC, Shara and I visited Annica's studio in order to collect sound samples. We got some really great loom sounds that I'm using to build a kind of drum machine. There were also different kinds of fabrics that we ripped apart and rubbed together, waved through the air. Those sounds I want to stretch and mangle using the modular synth. The possibilities are really endless. Shara and I both have a love for epic synth sounds and pop music, so there's also the idea of including the more familiar sound of synthesizers into our sound palette. With such a visually striking performance like this one, complete with, harp and percussion, visual instruments, I think the audience will really appreciate a complete feeling of what you see is what you hear. One of my favorite ways to do this live with vocals, like a vocal mic coming into a synthesizer, is you can use granular synthesis. Inside one of the modules here, there's a computer algorithm that siphons out tiny bits of the vocal waveform or whatever sound you want to put into it, really. And it basically repeats them at such an incredible speed that you get a pitch. It's like really, really fast repeatings of tiny little parts of the sound. So what I'm going to do is take a vocal sample from a song off of one of Shara's most recent album. The song is called A Million Pearls, and there's a really pretty ascending vocal melody in it that Shara sung very nicely. But I'm going to find ways with the modular synthesizer here to kind of just get different stuff out of it. I'll show you that now. Okay, so we have the vocal ready to come in from an external source through this cable. It goes into this module, which is a granular synthesis processing unit. So I'll just play the recording back, record it in, and then I'll start messing with it. Please enjoy. Here we go. There's the loop. Alrighty, well thanks for listening everyone. Peace and love from Detroit. Bye now.
Hi, welcome back. Before we show you the next video, I just want to remind everyone that Body Vessel is part of the Carolina Performing Arts Mellon Foundation Creative Futures residency. And those residencies are not just collaborations between the artists and students on campus, but they're also collaborations with the larger community as well as faculty. And I think Shara is going to introduce the next video.
Yes, so I spent the first year of the residency going to a lot of different choir rehearsals, and when I met the choir at Northern High School, I was excited to work with them, and amazing young people, and I wanted to spend more time with them. Fell in love with them, really. And Rachel Spencer is the director there, and so she's going to tell you a little bit about her program.
My name is Rachel Spencer, and I'm the chorus teacher at Northern High School. I've worked for Durham Public Schools for 12 years, and I am delighted that my students are a part of this collaboration for the Body Vessel project. Shara was looking for community organizations or schools to collaborate with, and I met with her and told her a little bit about my school and my students, and she started visiting, and then eventually in February she came with Helga and they worked with my students. In February, when the team visited, the main piece we were working on is If I Say That You're My Sister. We have always felt it's a sisterhood in that class, and yet this year it's been tricky to be as close for a variety of reasons. Whenever your leader is not consistent. So I started the year and then I was out with the baby and then I came back and then now we're in distance learning. That's tricky. And so that's one thing. And also there were just a lot of very different personalities in that class this year. And so we had a group of best friends over here and a group of best friends over here, and then some people that would butt heads over here. And then it's high school, but it was a particularly tricky year to talk about sisterhood. I could say that I explored these themes for myself, the themes of this project. Obviously, I'm a white woman teaching in a very diverse school. And when I started in DPS 12 years ago, it was such a new world for me. And I hope I never stop trying to learn how to be a better human. I think that's what teaching is. Once you stop trying to get better, then you're done. Part of that is the trust that you're going to come back. You're going to come back the next day. And with all the teacher turnover in Durham, that's not always something that they trust will happen. I am very much of a Energizer bunny, go, 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 keep it positive. Let's just try it again. If you work hard enough to pull them along with you, you'll get there somehow. However, when you have guests that come in that work differently and expect different things, students don't always like change. People don't always like change. I don't always like change. And so it was a big change in the leadership of the class. And that was something that I think we all wrestled with, was who are you? Why are you here? What are we doing? There's some trust issues, and there's some resistance. There's some drama. There's some uncomfortable truths that you have to sit with. And one of the best lines, I think, in the song that we worked on is, if I say that you're my sister, what actions do I take? When I see you struggling, I won't run away. And that's something I felt most people struggle with, is how not to run away from things that are uncomfortable. And that's one of the reasons I enjoyed working with Helga in particular. And it was harder than maybe I expected, but I am so glad that we had the opportunity to work together, and I look forward to working together in the future. We learned so much from Shara and Helga just by them coming and singing for us. You can tell, oh, it's a staccato there or a legato there or whatever. You can do that and you could see it in the music, but once you hear it, just the articulation and the tone and the meaning just popped to life as soon as we heard that. So it's just invaluable to have the artist come to the school and tell you, this is what I want, and this is how we're going to get there together.
Yeah, so there's so much in both those videos that I want to tease out. a couple of quick things. Zac talked about, how technically he's trying to recreate sounds that mirror the action, that mirror the garment, that mirror what you all are doing. And Rachel, I mean, there was a lot, I think, we can pull from her piece. The idea of sisterhood, the idea of building trust with teenagers. Isn't everything like high school? But how I think what is sort of two questions emerged for me from both those videos, and I think again from the overall project. The project is steeped in collaboration. Like, it's a key element of both the residency that you're part of, but I think also your process, what you all are trying to do. And I'm curious, how do you sort of get inside another's experience? I think that's one thing, and it seemed like that's what Rachel's also trying to figure out how to do with her students. And then the other thing, I think collaboration, like every relationship, is about negotiating power, whether it's perceived or real. And I'm wondering how you do those things in the process of making Body Vessel a reality. And who wants to jump in instead of me calling on someone? Or do I need to call on someone? Do I need?
No, maybe just give us a moment to even think about the question, because it's such a huge thing to kind of dive into. I feel like I was a different kind of teenager, I grew up around, there wasn't a lot of discussion about anything, right? You're a child, you're a student, this is a teacher, this person is in charge, and anyone who comes in and kind of steps into that energy is the person in charge, period. And that there also came with that a lot of expectation for who I would then be in response to that. And so as she was sharing that the kids had all this sort of turmoil and inconsistency, I understand that building trust would be a difficult thing. I understood that. But I also had an expectation that they understood that singing is work. It's not fun, that we know our craft, we come with a skill set that has nothing to do with what people see in the end on TV or in videos. Like, we understand the work of performance, the work of singing, and the work of friendship, like every relationship. And so I think that just looks different on both of us, and that Shara had been there before, that she had some time with them that I didn't have, and I was aware of how little time we had together, and felt and shared with them my struggle to have them feel seen, but to also get to work.
Okay,
I'm done. Yeah, sorry. I'm just replaying that movie in my head.
and I just want to invite people. In about less than 10 minutes or so, we'll be taking questions from the audience. So I just want to once again remind the audience to please send your questions to Facebook or to YouTube, whatever platform you are participating in. We would really like to engage with you. And so we just want to remind you to send those questions. And Annica, I haven't heard from you in a while, so maybe I'll have you talk about collaboration, power, however you want to respond.
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting collaboration. It's really layered. There's a lot of different people that are coming in, and all with different backgrounds too. So I think, it's just the way that we were kind of talking about the sculpture and being in it, and that it's this experience of, control or letting go. I think it's the same with the way this piece has been made too. It's learning of how to collaborate and understand what your role is. Or I really think, honestly, we're redefining roles in this piece too, because there's a lot of questioning of, even I think for you, Mark, like, what is a director? I mean, you've been doing video, you've been doing, like, it's like all these other things too. And that's really exciting for me as an artist and designer, because I like the in between. I want to be somewhere that, is constantly questioning what that means, and also pushing it forward. And I really think that we are.
I'll just address your question about collaboration, power sharing, and negotiation. I obviously, on the face of it, I'm an unlikely choice to be the, so-called director of this piece, which is, not something that a white man would be normally seen as. I don't know exactly why Shara first invited me into this piece, but I assume that part of it, at least, is that my inclination is to interpret the role of a director as a connector, and to see it more of a responsibility than a power. And I would say that interpretation is being heightened even more in this piece. It's not about hierarchy. It's not about being in charge. It's about opening spaces, making spaces that feel safe enough to work in, doing the difficult work of allowing a friendship, which normally we keep in containers that protect each other, out into the wild, which is scary, or can be. So all of these things, I think that I see, there's much more of sort of a like helping from the perimeter kind of feeling to what I'm doing, and it's exciting. It's like there's a lot of discovery possible. It's a new spot.
Mm-hmm. Shara, before we go to questions.
Yeah, I think realizing that you're walking in, for me, I am a composer, and coming in with this sort of that's my cloak, by the way. That's the European white guy cloak, and it's like, oh, okay, well, I've got the big C word on my shoulders here, and what does that mean in this situation? And what I've had to do is recognize, first of all, the biases that I'm walking into the room with, and then to begin to see situations that, hey, this doesn't work. To think that music making written on a score means that you're a composer. That's not what, I wouldn't have even said that years ago, but now even more so, I wouldn't say that if you put notes on a page, that's how we define what composition is. And so I think the challenge for me in this, as coming in as a composer and performer, is realizing I'm not the only composer performer in the room. and so we're having different ways in which we are making music, and that means we have to create more space and more time to allow us to get to know each other. And how do you work? What works and what doesn't work for you? What doesn't work for me? And then we're negotiating that. But it's a beautiful thing to not have the weight of that word, and to be able to discover what composition can be like when done collaboratively. It's a different definition.
Thank you. Mark?
Oh, I wanted to introduce one last video of a collaborator who's, we have to keep opening this process. We have sort of our core group, and it has to keep sort of flowering outward, or allowing more people to come into this space that we're making. So we have people, there are people more as we get toward the production and knowing more and more what it is, there'll be more and more people who are sharing this space with us. So Jason Lynch is a talented lighting designer. I've worked with him before, and he's based in Chicago, and he has yet to actually work. We were going to be working together in the theater in a residency that got a little disrupted because of the virus, but he's still, watching us from afar and thinking conceptually about lights.
From the earlier conversations about the project with the team, I was really struck by the idea of contrast and celebrating the beauty of opposites within this same environment, and particularly how two images or a series of images can affect the entire canvas and or each based on how the individual perceives what is in front of them. As I was researching for Body Vessel, I was in awe with the reminder of how much we can actually celebrate and appreciate differences and variation through many of the art movements we continually reference today, from surrealism, cubism, expressionism, etc. We really do find beauty in opposites. As I went down my rabbit hole of artists that celebrated a diversity of forms, I was really inspired by the work of Ivan Navarro. He's a Chilean artist who is known for creating sculptures using various forms of light, light and dark. He arranges various sources of light to create images that represent everyday walks of life. One sculpture may be of two people dancing or two people participating in some sort of sport, such as wrestling. But what I find to be the most powerful in viewing his work is when you think about how turning off one or even half of those sources affects the piece as a whole. That sense of working together for a greater good is lost and or takes on a new meaning. Now that work is a series of light sources floating in a space undefined. This similar experience as it relates to thinking about Body Vessel is what makes the project so exciting. These women from different walks of life are joined together via this beautiful dress created by Annica. And it's exciting to see the differences from when they first join to when they begin to understand how the movement of one affects the other, which ultimately affects both in the end. It is the beauty of arranging and therefore celebrating the differences that highlights the beauty of remaining harmonious, even through the most opposite situations and circumstances. The seemingly difficult to navigate contrasts in life are what make it interesting and charming.
Okay, as we invite Christopher back into the conversation to help us with the Q&A, a couple of things that I want to mention is before he comes on screen or while he comes on screen is one of the things you all have talked about, and maybe we'll get a chance to talk about this more during the Q&A, is in previous conversations, all of you have talked about the deep listening you have to do for collaboration. I also appreciate Helga talking about the work, the craft of, because I think when we see art, when we read novels or we see a play or we see a movie, it looks so easy and it looks so effortless, and the work it takes to look effortless, like we rarely recognize. So I so appreciate you saying that. And so to turn to some deep listening and some more conversation, I'm going to turn it over to Christopher.
Hello, everyone. Thank y'all for this beautiful, beautiful exploration of the project. And I'm very excited for its premiere. It's going to be wonderful. So I do have some questions. And so with that being said, I want to start, Annica. I think I want to start and ask you the first question, which is you, in your video, you talked about the idea of introducing sculpture into this performative space. And I think that this project is going to be a beautiful example of that. So then I wonder, what are some things you hope to work on and see happen in terms of seeing that medium in the performing arts? What are some things that you've kind of just thought about, dreamed about, and envisioned, happening for the idea of having that medium being used in this performative way?
That's a great question. It's really exciting to kind of think about all the possibilities. And it keeps going, especially every time again when I get together with this group and I'm seeing what I created perform. Of course, it's just giving me all these other ideas. What I guess I hope happens that it comes into this space is that, of course, it inspires others. That we start a new conversation, and just the way that we've been talking about of working within the sculpture, there's this language that exists, but it's also being created at the same time. So those are some things that I'm really curious about and really excited to see of how do we talk about this? I mean, we had a meeting last week and we kept calling it a dress and now we're calling it a sculpture. So it's even the way that we're referring to it and the way that we're placing it and the language that we're kind of, I guess, creating as it's growing is starting to talk about sculpture and performance, I think, in a new and hopefully different way moving forward.
Thank you. And so my next question, Mark, I thought that it was amazing the way that you referred to your job being, as director, being a connector and seeing it as a responsibility rather than a place of power. So I know with this being the kind of piece that it is and being based on such a personal connection, for other directors out there, and I know we have some watching, to be able to enter into that with all of the kinds of things that you mentioned that were challenges, like what kind of tips would you give for directors working with a piece that is so personal and carries so much weight? How do you kind of like push the process along but also allow room for it to kind of grow the way that it needs? It's a delicate dance, and so what advice would you give?
I think it's always about relationships, and it's always about relationships to the people, relationships to the material, understanding what people can bring and like what is the best that each person can bring. And then it's not going to be the same approach to have each person bring their best. It's going to be very different. So you can't, there's no one size fits all. You can't just get out there and bellow for what you want. You have to negotiate it by building trust, building relationships, and really listening and being observant. I think that if you feel like you've been able to find these best parts, best abilities, best moments, best freedoms of people, and then you can actually put them in contact with each other, they ignite by themselves. Then you just watch it happen. And if you have created an environment where there isn't that trust and there isn't that, you aren't able to bring those things into contact, it's very hard. So that's it.
Thank you, Mark. And Shara and Helga, this is a beautiful project. We've gotten introduced to some of the collaborators. In addition to percussion with Zac, we've also got Winifred Garrett, who's an amazing harpist who's in this area, who's a part of this piece.
Yes.
There's just so much happening. So then I asked, I know Helga, you mentioned about the path of discovery beginning right where you are and then kind of building from there. And this piece that you've crafted, I hope it inspires other collaborations like this, because I think that the art that can come from it will be amazing. But I know that can also be kind of scary. So embarking on this journey, what would you say to other artists in terms of envisioning the kinds of projects that they could build with those that they have those kinds of close relationships with?
Put on your big girl pants. That's it.
That's it? Okay.
Pull them up and get to work.
So with that,
Shara, did you want to say something?
What she said.
Big girl pants.
Big girl pants.
Okay.
Time to put them on. Leave them up. Hold on.
That's actually what I would say. Hold on and let go.
Okay. Well, with that, there's another question, and it's how has this project revealed truths about yourself and your creativity or your world that maybe you knew about but hadn't inherently explicitly named or identified previously? So what kind of, has it started to uncover some things that you can, through this process, can give name to as an artist through this creative process?
Certainly, I have to say that to engage is to grieve, and to enter into grief. We are daring to examine or to open up conversation around a tremendously horrific past. And so, you know, anytime you make any piece of art, you have to be willing to examine yourself. And I have to look at the whole of my life. All of the art making that I've done in my life has brought about radical change. And this project is very much that. And the willingness to open yourself to what the mirror is and say, time for change. And this project certainly has done that for me.
And I would say for myself that I have never experienced, and we talk about, now we're talking about Black bodies in such a very particular and specific way in this present moment. And I have never been held in this way. I have never felt more free with my body and in my body than I feel inside this sculpture being held by my sister. Never. And there are ways that I am moving and discovering how big I can be and how big I haven't been, just by virtue of us being and agreeing to be in this piece, inside this sculpture, inside this process together.
Thank you. So my last question, before we go, is Tanya, for you. I know one of the things about this is that part of Creative Futures as a whole, and then and part of Carolina Performing Arts work is when we bring work to Chapel Hill, is that it is there for the community, it's there for those who love arts, but it is also there for our academic community. And all of those folks are able to kind of, in engaging in art, to kind of be a part of a larger conversation and then leave with things to think about. So I ask you, could you possibly think of 2 questions that you can think of as you've been introduced to this project that you imagine folks could leave with, that they could continue to think about after being introduced to a project that is this dynamic and this personal and this vulnerable?
You only want 2?
Just 2.
First, I want to say I really want to thank Carolina Performing Arts, because various artists who've had residencies have come to speak to my students, and it has really, it adds so much, I think. That there's a way, you teach history or you teach literature, or you teach, women's and gender studies or another interdisciplinary field, and it's about, learning the theory or learning the philosophy. And I think when we add the arts and artists to what we value in the classroom and what we ask students to really engage with, it really shows what the humanities are about and what they can do. And I'm really grateful to be at Carolina at a time when, as an institution, we value art and artists in this way. I think moving forward, some questions that people might think of as they go forward is I believe at the end of Rachel's video, she talked about a lyric from the song, but she also talked about what will you do? And I feel like this moment demands of all of us, it's asking all of us, what will you do? We all are dealing with our fears, we all are dealing with being unsettled. But again, I think the moment asks us, what will you do with that? Will you just sit in fear? Will you sit in silence? Will you sit in guilt? Or will you do something about it? So I think I ask myself every day, I ask my students, and I would ask the audience, as you heard from the Body Vessel team, how they are negotiating all of these things, these vulnerabilities, these histories, these ideas of place and person, but they're doing it within the piece. You know, that's part of how they are confronting these histories and our past. And I would just, I think one thing I would certainly ask people is, what will you do? Another question that's very similar, I think, it's probably the same question with different words. But one of the reasons that this project, when Shara told me about it initially, that I found exciting was about interracial coalition. And I think we have to ask ourselves, what is that? What does that look like? What does it mean? That again, if we are going to be honest and really try to interrogate our past, to move beyond the histories of violence and enslavement and white supremacy in this country, what does interracial coalition look like? I mean, I know everybody likes to trot out Martin Luther King and, you know, I have a dream and go beyond the color of your skin to the content of your character. And that's critical. That's important. Absolutely. But I also want to know, what does that mean to you? What does it mean to engage beyond yourself? What does it mean to engage with difference? What does it mean to engage with people who are not like you? So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Mark?
I just have to say one last thing to go back to the point of people doing amazing work and making it look effortless. Tanya Shields, thank you so much for the work you've done with us on this presentation, which was your grace and intelligence and the way that you led us through this. Unbelievable. And it's so
scholarship.
Generous. And scholarship, thank you. The list could go on and on, but we're running out of time. So, but thank you. It's so appreciated. Very, very generous of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you all. So that has been our conversation for today. Thank you all for being a part of this process. I'm so excited to work with a project that allows me to be able to work with all of you. And I hope that all of the supporters of Carolina Performing Arts are going to wait in anticipation for the premiere of Body Vessel. So thank you to everyone who's been listening. And we hope that everyone enjoys the rest of their afternoon.
Bye.